the notion of affectivity matured recently within continental or continental-inspired political thought and philosophy. The increasing popularity of the concept of affect is motivated by the growing awareness of the inadequacy of our theoretical tools for understanding the complexity of human subjectivity. This is brought about the rehabilitation of the concept of affect, particularly but not limited to, within political and philosophical discourses. I refer, for instance, to the Negri formulation of affective labor or Masumi demand for a materialist ontology of affect more recently. While for this thinker, the reassessment of the role of affectivity has meant a return to Spinoza. This return derived from the intimate relation Spinoza poses between affect, action, and bodily movement, and also his view of affectivity as a power of increasing and decreasing the structure of the mind and the body. Therefore, the rediscovery of Spinoza's account of affectivity has meant the reaffirmation of the autonomy of the affect and the withdrawal of affectivity from the domain of emotion, and I'm referring particularly to Masumi. Well, it is to this kind of discussion that I wish my paper to contribute. I propose to approach affectivity as a process of individuation, which form and transform contemporaneously the psychic, physical, ethical, and political life of individuals. To this end, I intend to insist further on the return to Spinoza's account of the affect commenced within contemporary continental thought. My focus will rest on the dynamics of affect, the notion of conatus and desire. For the purpose of this paper, I will not venture into a discussion of Spinoza's conception of the body and the mind, as well as the differences between action and passion, positive affect and passion. In the first part of this paper, I will discuss the general affective mechanism, and in the second part, I will consider the notion of conatus and desire, and the status of the human being that emerge from this affective mechanism. The argument I will advance through this paper is that Spinoza's theory of affectivity reveals a collective process of psychic, physical individuation, which opens an explored avenue for thinking the individual of the present in its ontological, political, and ethical aspects. Well, before proceeding any further, two notes on my reading of Spinoza's theory of affect. First, my approach is built upon the interpretation of Spinoza's ontology and politics elaborated by Deleuze, Machery, Balibar, within the continental perspective. And second, I want to give you some clarification on the terminology adopted in my reading. The term of process, collective, and trans-individuality I will employ in this paper are borrowed from Simondon relational ontology of individuation and adapted to Spinoza's theory of affect. And of course, I will define this concept in the course of my reading. So taking this argument into account, let us to examine what an affect can do according to Spinoza. For Spinoza, affectivity is centered on movement of affecting and being affected. Affective movement alters the equilibrium of mind and body, which pass from active to passive state alternatively. Activity corresponds to an improvement of human conatus. Conversely, passivity implies a degree of conatus. Activity and passivity originated from two principal couples of affect, which are joy and love, sadness and hate. Joy and love are defined as a transition from a lesser to higher degree of perfection. By contrast, pain and hate are transition from a higher to a lesser level of perfection. So taken in themselves, affects are varying transition. The literal meaning of the term transition refers to a movement from one state to another. Therefore, an affect is precisely a movement which contains itself a power of transformation. This power of transformation derives from the capacity of affect to increase and decrease the state of perfection. And in the ethics, perfection means actuality. Thus, through the affective mechanism, mind and body acquire different levels of actuality. The degree of mind and body means that these are composed by a certain amount of other elements, such as simply body and ideas, which in the ethic are broadly defined as individuals. Given that a certain capacity of actualization is implied in the dynamic of affect, and given that these involve a new composition of mind and body, I would argue here affectivity uncovers a collective process of seeking individuation in a Simondonian sense, and for Simondon, a process is formed and activated by phases which differentiate being. Back to Spinoza, it is a process because each affect operates as a phase, which brings transformation into the existing order. Each affect is a conductor of change and thus behaves as a phase within a process. The transformation generated by the affective mechanism organizes a process which does not proceed towards, so to speak, the better. Affect, Spinoza explained, constantly vary. Joy might change into sorrow and vice versa, and this further transform into other affect, which might be active and passive, alternatively. Given this variability of affect cannot be described as upward movement, neither can they be described as downward movement, as abandoned within the analytical tradition suggests. Positive affect, such as joy and love, do not exclusively cause a progression towards a superior condition, because even these may suddenly turn into passive affect, such as pain. Therefore, the varying level of perfection activated by the affective transition should be considered as a non-linear process. And this develops through complexity, which means more or less level composition of bodies and ideas. I have also called this process psychic, crucially without inheriting with the interiority of an individual on the structure of the mind. In contrast with the general analytic approach to Spinoza's notion of affect, the affective process actualizes meaning, notion of time and action, which are collective, and maintain individual in an enduring relational condition. Given that affectivity activates movement of affecting being affected, which transforms the entire anatomy of an individual through various compositions with others individuals, this movement cannot merely describe the interior life of a human being. Furthermore, given that the affective movement determines the activity and passivity of an individual, which coincide contemporaneously with the acquisition of idea and action, they cannot express the path of the mind towards higher stage of vitality. As Bennett again has affirmed, action implies an activity situated and constantly oriented within the external world, and this inevitably brings individual into relation with others. And Spinoza always regards affect as a dynamics between individuals. Joy, for example, is explained as a relation between individuals and a shared object. Joy, however, does not arise from an external object and the individual. Spinoza affirmed that every feeling can accidentally cause joy and sadness. So therefore, if affect are intensive movement, an affect, I would argue, is transversal to individuals. By this I mean that affective transition operates between individuals and make them converge into a novel collective structure. This, I claim, is what Spinoza means when he presents affect as a transition. This transition discovers a multifaceted power of individuation. The result is not a joyful individual object, but rather a new psychic affective phase, which is crucially collective and productive. The collective result from the similarity of affect by which human beings are surrounded, and this generates self-awareness, conception of others and the world. They have a collective character because the affective state is common for all individuals. Furthermore, given that affect impresses alteration within the human being, from which he acts and thinks in a certain way, affective movement creates a collective ground through and within which individuals are further individualized. They commence to act and think in a certain way collectively and not as a singular subjectivity. It is for this reason that I have defined this specific process of individuation as collective. Lastly, this process as a materialist component, Spinoza defines affect as a traces inherent within the body, which are eventually individuated, actualized into specific action, political and ethical behavior. So in this way, the reading of Spinoza presented here prevents us to identify in his theory of affectivity a form of psychotherapy, which aims at the recovery of human life from its psychic bondage and disorder, as it is being claimed particularly by Emphasise and Bennett within the analytic tradition. If we follow the approach developed here, affects are not ordinary human disorder. These are problematic. Spinoza describes affective state as a mutable condition in which individuals are driven continually towards diverse directions. This mutability of the affect generates problems which transform the entire process of individuation individual into a novel and more problematic psychic state that could be psychic, political, and ethical community. And then it is for this reason that I claim that affectivity unfolds a complex collective process of individuation. In the search for a novel materialist grammar of and for the affect, the Spinoza ontology of the affect becomes imperative. Viewing affectivity through Spinozian logic offers us the opportunity to understand what confluences of forces and dynamics lie at the very basis of the formation and development of every form of community, ethical, political, and civic. It also helps us to reshaping our knowledge of the power of the affect within human life. So, having described what an affect can do, so the final part, the conclusive part of this paper, I want to discuss what is the marginal status of the human being. And to address this question, we need to talk about conatus and desire in Spinoza. By conatus, Spinoza referred to striving to exist and persevering to life. I suggest stressing the aspect of conatus as a striving towards. For the literal meaning of the preposition towards, this suggests the idea of movement oriented to and outside. Striving toward is a force which is both internal and external. It is internal because conatus is an innate tendency which characterizes the very essence of every individual. It is also external because this power is shaped by movement which drive individuals towards an external world. The thought to strive towards connotes a relational attitude which is somewhat transversal to individuals. It resides within them, but at the same time is directly connected with the world. Furthermore, conatus is extremely powerful. It brings individuals towards the world through which they orient themselves and increase their own life. In this way, I argue Spinoza's concept of conatus uncover a relational power, which cannot be narrowed to an egoistic desire for domination or an unconscious drive in a Freudian sense. In the human context, conatus means, as a crucial implication, it means that the biological life of human being is powerful and fundamentally relational. Concerning itself, human life is centered on a relational force, which is precondition of all other function. In the humankind, conatus is expressed by desire. Desire structures both the mind and the body. In this light, human desire is striving towards the other. Similarly with the conatus of all other being, desire is transversal and situates human being within the world. Yet, differently from conatus as such, within the human sphere, the activity-oriented individual within their milieu coincide immediately with political, ethical, and theoretical behaviors. Given this nature of desire, I think that the Simondonian notion of trans-individuality fully unfolds the power of desire. By trans-individuality, Simondon means an affective movement of individuation which traverses being. This force is one that restructures being into a new collective dimension. This is the basis upon which psychosocial unions are generated. In Spinoza's argument, desire is a relational power driven by affective movement. The affective movement recreates and creates a collective psychic condition, as we have seen before. In this, individuals are constantly in relation with others through shared meaning and action. Building upon a suggestion made by Etienne Balibar on a certain affinity between Simondon and Spinoza, I argue Spinoza's concept of desire and body, Simondonian trans-individuality, which lies between beings and exposes them towards novel psychosocial union. Reading desire as a form of trans-individuality, in my view, enables us to understand Spinoza's distinct conception of human being. Following this reading, desire does not originate from lack, need, and egoistical force. By contrast, desire expresses an excess of forces and potential, which maintains individual within an enduring relational condition. This desire brings to light the fundamental characteristics of an individual, that is, its collective life. Conatus and desire continuously move the individual towards composition with others, through which he becomes more real. It is true, and within this perspective, the one opened by Spinoza, that we should think the individual of the present. In a Spinozist way, the peculiarity of a human being is characterized by a relational power, conatus, and her or his life is driven by a form of trans-individual tendency, desire. This tendency determines human desire for constructing seeking social and political community. The consequence of Spinoza's argument calls us to question theories that present the social contract as the basis of civil society, and also those ethical and anthropological conjectures which rely on the definition of human nature as a social and egotistical.